Hello and welcome back. In the last session we looked at diminished chords, that is to say a chord type built entirely from minor thirds. In this session we're going to look at a contrasting type of chord, that is a chord built entirely from major thirds. And we call this chord type an augmented chord. It's far less common than the diminished chord, or indeed any of the chords of the harmonized scale, but it's still something that's worth understanding and studying to complete our knowledge of chords and chord structure. So what do we get if we build a chord entirely from major thirds? Well, we get a major third, obviously enough. Another major third up from there gives us an augmented fifth. That is one semitone, one fret space higher than the perfect fifth. And it's this augmented interval that gives the augmented chord its name. Another major third from the augmented fifth will bring us to the octave. This means that each augmented chord is a triad chord containing three notes: root, major third and augmented fifth. Since adding another major third brings us back to the octave, this means that, like the diminished chord pattern, this pattern is again cyclic. So that, for example, if we take the chord of C augmented, that is C, E and G sharp, this chord contains the same notes as E augmented, that is E, G sharp and C, and the same notes as G sharp augmented, that is G sharp, C and E. Since each augmented chord contains 3 of the 12 notes of the chromatic scale, that means there are 4 unique augmented chords. As with the diminished chords, we would normally choose the lowest or bass note to name as the root of the chord, but in practice the inversions can be used to a large extent interchangeably. Now let's look at some examples of fingerings for the augmented chords. I'll begin with the familiar C major shape, here in the open position, and I can turn this into a C augmented chord by taking my first finger and moving it to the G sharp at fret 1 on string 3, the G string, and then I can bring in the octave C simply by flattening this first finger out to play 2 strings together. Now this is perhaps slightly tricky fingering, particularly if you wanted to keep that top E string ringing. So another way to play this would be to start with finger 4 instead of finger 3 on the low C, and then play the major third with finger 3, the augmented fifth once again with finger 1, and the octave C with finger 2. Either of these fingerings can be used as a transposable fingering for the augmented chord, simply by leaving out the top and bottom E strings and playing the chord just on the middle 4 strings, that is strings 5, 4, 3, 2. Now a few other useful transposable fingerings for the augmented chord. One is played on just the top 4 strings, and we begin with a root note with finger 4, and then 1 fret down on the next string up, string 3 with finger 2, finger 3 in the same fret space on string 2, and down 1 fret on string 1 with finger 1. We can also play a couple of fairly easy fingerings for the augmented chord on just the bottom 4 strings. If we begin with finger 3 on string 6, we then have a major third, down 1 fret and up 1 string with finger 2, add another major third to get our augmented fifth, down 1 fret and up 1 string with finger 1. I can now place finger 4 on string 3, up 1 fret space from the 3rd finger position to play an octave above the major third. final example for this session, if I begin with finger 4 on string 5, I can play the major third and augmented fifth with fingers 3 and 2, and then bring finger 1 in position onto string 6 to play the bass note. To go along with the augmented chord, there's a new type of scale. As the augmented chord is a chord of all major thirds, what we want is a scale in which every third is a major third. And this simply means a scale in which every step is a whole tone. In other words, a whole tone scale. And you'll notice that this contrasts with the conventional diatonic scales of 7 intervals and the diminished scale of 8 intervals, in that this scale contains 6 intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's our octave. The whole tone scale has been used as the foundation for a whole system of composition. It's one of the ways that the early 20th century composers, such as Claude Debussy, tried to break away from the constraints of the traditional tonal system. You may wish to pursue the study of this further in your own time, but for the purposes of this course, we're just thinking of it in terms of a chord scale to accompany an augmented chord as and when you encounter one. And the simplest fingering for the whole tone scale is simply to play 2 whole tones on each string in a stretched position, and then we simply move up 1 fret to repeat the pattern on the next string. And there's our octave. The only thing to remember is that if we continue the pattern up the fretboard, when we reach string 2, the B string, because of the difference in tuning of this string, we now have to move up 2 fret spaces. And that's all I have to say about the augmented chords and the whole tone scale. As I've said, this is a somewhat rarer chord than the other chord types we've studied, and I'm afraid I don't actually have any real-world examples to demonstrate to you. In the next couple of sessions, I'm going to conclude the chord work with a look at chord substitution, and this simply means some examples of alternative types of chords that you can use in place of the normal chords of the harmonised scale to add more interest and variety to your compositions. So please come back and join me soon.